Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. What is up, Hort peeps?
Hello, everyone.
What are we called? Our true leaves. We haven't brought about our true leaves in a while.
When you say "what is up" at the beginning, are you addressing us or are you addressing the audience?
It doesn't matter.
I never know.
I mean, I like to pretend the audience is just here in the room with us. Like,
right, should we? I guess should we respond or should we just let it hang in the
I think
silence?
you should do whatever your soul tells you.
I like awkward silence a lot.
Yeah. I think you should do whatever. This question is directly at you because you cannot. The people listening cannot respond. I'm sorry. Maybe in the future.
Feel free to respond quietly to yourself.
Quietly to you. Does anybody else do that when they listen to podcasts and somebody says like, think about this, and you actually do it in your brain and go through that?
I also make fun of people when they say silly things, or like I laugh really hard and say that was a good one, as if they could hear me. Yeah. So yes.
Feedback.
Well,
feedback.
I was thinking, we're still. So it's March. If you're listening to this outside of March, right now it's March in our timeline. So you're in a different timeline than we are. But I always think this is the time of year when people sort of give up or forget about.
Give up.
That one's
I thought I was the only one.
Wow. All right, March. I'm out.
I'm March. We're done.
It was a good run.
Good run. Yeah.
You've already peaked out for the year, and you are done.
But I mean, essentially,
I can see where this is going. I'm out.
Yeah.
What?
Oh man.
They let go or forget of what, like, something that they were going to, I don't want to call them new resolutions, but maybe something they were really working towards, or like the word. A lot of people, I think, pick words that they want
I like to say guidelines because it
focus
seems
on.
awkward.
Guidelines. So kind of thinking of it from that perspective, what's something maybe good that you've done for yourself lately?
I thought you were going to say what we'd already failed at, so I'm glad you're.
Yeah. You could also tell me that, and then tell me what we've done in response. So
this diet isn't going well. I mean, this diet is not going well.
But is there something that you have done for yourself? I feel like this time of year is like the time we need to remember, like to keep up with those things.
Recommit ourselves.
Thank you. Recommit ourselves to that. So like
renew the vows, if you will.
Yes. So on Sundays in the morning, I have Sunday morning for myself. Usually I'd go out in the morning and do that. But I've been reading while I eat my Cheerios in the morning, and then I don't go outside until like about noon. And maybe that will change in the summer, and I'll have to be like an afternoon person because it's really, really hot. But that's something that I've been really trying to keep up with, and having a little time to myself to do whatever I want in my pajamas. And I don't feel guilty about it. And I don't fold laundry, and I don't do any of the things I have to do. I do something that I want to do. So is anybody doing anything like that? Or?
Well, I assume when you're reading, you have a book, because otherwise it was just you and the Cheerios. Just be like, ooh,
reading.
Yeah, reading the Cheerios.
Yeah. There's not a lot. It's not like alphabet.
I mean, sometimes you could read the back of the box. So,
I see.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, got us there.
I would say for me, it started before last year, and it's just kind of a little bit more of a balanced approach to eating regularly, not too much, not too little throughout the day, and moving a little bit, and reading some things that are for like an academic program thing that I'm doing, and for my general kind of engagement. And I've had kind of fits and starts of doing that more regularly and not, but those things do ground me pretty regularly.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are some things that I'm still committed to, and I'm recommitting to in front of 3 witnesses.
Live studio audience.
You have witnesses now. It's serious. It is.
What about you guys?
I'm trying to think. Josh, what do you got? I don't make a lot of resolutions, but I have things I want to do, I guess. But I don't verbalize them because that sounds like a commitment. What do you got, Josh?
Right. Just before the break, the Christmas break and the New Year, I started making it so the first thing I did in the morning was to stretch for about 10 minutes. And I've been keeping that up. So
Nice.
But a couple of days that I've been like sick, so I just kind of have decided to rest on those days. But I would say every day since like late November until today, I've only missed like maybe 5 days.
Nice. I need to do that.
It's been good. Yeah, when you first said, "What have you been doing?" I was like, "Nothing." But that's how much of a routine it's become.
It's good. Yeah. You got to have something, Ray. You got to
I
Mm,
vocalize
did.
it so you do it.
One of the things I said I was going to try to be better is be more present in the moment. And
mm,
Jennifer and I have talked a lot about that. Is whatever I'm doing, because I don't know, for me, or maybe it's for others as well, multitasking doesn't always work for me. That means I do
mm,
5 jobs, even
Mm-hmm.
worse than I would do one job. So I'm
totally.
trying to be in the moment for what I'm doing at that time.
Mm.
And it's just, I guess it's, I've read a lot of works here lately on natural work pace and workflow, and not comparing yourself to others and the productivity they may or may not experience, because everyone's different. But I've been
Mm,
trying to work on that, and it all goes back to this concept of being in the moment, whether you are working on something at your job or doing something at home. And for me, it impacts things like my ability to sit down and read a book, because I've kind of gotten out
mm-hmm,
of the habit of that a little bit, and I always was a reader, and that was a relaxing thing for me. And I'm trying to get back into things like that, even though it takes time and you have to kind of be in the moment for that. But yeah, I've been trying to be more in the moment, and focusing on singular tasks, because I seem to do better at that. But yeah, that's one of the things I'm trying to work on a little bit.
Awesome.
It's kind of wild how many different faith and philosophical traditions tend to have some component that centers on that exact practice of being
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
present. And
Hmm.
yeah.
there's like a real wisdom in that, of like, okay, all these people have all kinds of things they disagree about, but the idea of presence
Yeah,
and
Mm,
existing in the here and now, and
the moment.
it's
Yeah.
kind of a common theme through a lot of those. The other thing about reading, I think, is that it has this way of transporting you and giving
Mm-hmm.
you perspective in a very, what feels to me like a unique kind of way that, I think we, several of us have had a kind of a rough start to the year in a number of ways, and it's easy to kind of get caught in the
Mm-hmm.
in that cycle of thought, and in the moment that you're in now, if the moment that you're in now is a really difficult one, which is important to sit with. But I found that when I started reading more again, it took me to this place of like, oh, I'm connected with other people across time,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously relationships are important, but I think that's a really, reading in particular, what you said, Ray, jumped out at me about that.
Yeah.
And
And
Alexis, oh,
it's
sorry, go ahead.
tough. Oh no, I was going to say that is tough, and I was taking it for granted. Doing a simple activity like reading that I used to just take for granted, sit down, and read 100 pages. I was
mm,
not giving that the time, because it does take time and focus. And I caught myself doing things like listening to audiobooks. I do that in the car a lot, because
Mhm.
that is one of the few times where you have to be present in the moment, or it can be kind of dangerous. So yeah,
right,
I
right.
was like, but I was using that as a crush, and I still love audio crutch.
Definitely.
I still love audiobooks, but now I'm trying to, get back into that old habit of reading and still listen to audiobooks. So, yeah.
Well, Alexis earlier mentioned reading the back of the Cheerio box.
Mm-hmm,
And so
Good
it's,
stuff.
anybody can read anything. But, one of the things I remember from being a kid, back in those days, on the Honey Nut Cheerio boxes, they would
Mm-hmm.
often
nice.
have information about bees, and bees'
Mm,
strange behaviors, their dances and things we don't understand. They had the cute little bee on the box. And bees have kind of come to the forefront of a lot of conversations about conservation and about all these other issues. They're one amongst this group of different organisms that we call pollinators.
And there it is, people. If you've been wondering how long it'll take us to get to the episode
Yes,
topic, and there it
it
is.
was
Oh, is that what we're
exactly
talking? Is
nine
that what we're
minutes.
talking about today?
Not like
it
what we're
is.
talking about today.
It's been a
Yeah,
while
yeah,
since we've all been together. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I just,
Yeah.
sorry, I just thought that it was. I know everyone's excited. I'm excited to talk about pollinators with you guys as well. But it hit me the other day that just kind of to remember to, you know, do something that you said you were going to do, and that it can be nice to kind of recommit to those things, even if you've not been doing a good job of it. So recommit. But now we're committing to the idea of pollinator gardens,
Mm-hmm.
pollinators, and or I want to rephrase them to like, I don't know, beneficial gardens or something, because I think the more and more I have learned about beneficial gardens, the more I've learned that it's not, or it, beneficial insect gardens, it's not just insects that can do a lot of good things for us in the garden, or even in a farm setting on a larger scale. We're seeing people on very large scales, like agronomic crops are starting to put in. And by agronomic, if you're not familiar with that term, we're talking like large corn, soybean type of things most of the time when we talk agronomic crops. They're starting to put in these hedgerows and areas of native habitat to attract a lot of beneficial insects, beneficial birds and things like that that'll encourage those kind of IPM tactics we talk about a lot in their field. So,
So like these
yeah.
ecological zones,
Yeah.
sometimes the artists formerly known as butterfly gardens or
Mhm.
pollinator gardens. Now we're
Mhm.
just expanding the scope. We're going to represent it with
Mm.
a symbol, just like Prince did, instead of as it just transcends. Yeah, I like that. So where do we want to start with that? I think we could start at the beginning. We could start at the end. Just
I
Let's
guess, I guess why. I mean, pollinators,
yeah.
we just take for granted they're super important. I mean, for a lot of our food crops, sometimes you just have to start with the why, and the why is really easy for pollinators because they do so much for us in our food system. Not only the food crops, but wildflowers, lots of other plants. Basically, for the reproduction cycle of plants, pollinators are incredibly important.
Mhm.
Not just bees. There's over 1,000 types of species of bees here that's native in the U.S., but it's also butterflies, like Brett mentioned. But it's things like hummingbirds, flies, beetles, wasps, all those things are pollinators. So I love that we've kind of expanded this discussion today from, we originally kicked around the idea of butterflies, but pollinators kind of takes into account so much more.
Mhm.
And when we talk about pollinators, the why is easy, I think, because they are so important to us for just everyday life. So,
and even
Right.
yeah.
just to riff on Alexis's appeal to include non pollinating beneficial
Mhm.
organisms as
Mhm.
well. That I think there's a general has been a general move toward understanding approaching agriculture and horticulture in as opposed to trying to create these sanitized,
Mhm.
sterile environments devoid of all everything that's not the crop,
Mhm.
toward understanding like actually if we can grow and simulate some aspects of more natural ecologically balanced
Mhm.
systems, there's a lot of benefits that come along with that. And so, Alexis, what are you're talking about other things besides just pollinators? You're talking about the birds. I mean, what are they? I don't need anyone pooping on my car, so that's about
Yeah.
Mhm.
all I can
I
grow.
I love that you said that sanitizing, because I had this just like wake up call relatively recently, right, in my growing career, and I've been trained as a horticulturist, and it's kind of always been this sanitize, 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 and it's not to say that you shouldn't keep your areas clean, that you need to make sure that you're doing things to protect for disease and insects, but like this idea, like you said, going back and like microbes aren't always bad, like we can like help encourage microbes to do all of these things, but also working with these beneficials and thinking of it as more of a habitat for anything. So not only pollinators, of course I work in a world a lot with cut flowers, so really we don't want our flowers pollinated because that really takes away the vase life and things like that. So ideally I'm not necessarily looking for pollinators as much as I'm looking for beneficial insects that are going to feed on those bad insects. Or my new fascination is with birds that are going to feed on like beetle pests that I have. So and in flowers and in veggies, we get a lot of cucumber beetle, Japanese beetle are really really bad. And how do I increase the bird population? The smaller birds that are can be out in those fields that are getting at that, but also things like spiders. When it comes to larger beetles like Japanese beetles, which are horrible for just about
Mhm.
everybody, even little garter snakes will feed on them. So how do we encourage these predators, whether they're insects or mammals or something, to feed on these bad bugs, so to speak? So that's like my new huge fascination is with
Yeah,
birds and those types of
A
things.
lot of our
Snakes
podcasts
eating
have
beetles right in
Yeah.
front of you.
yeah.
Specifically, I want to watch it happen. I would love nothing more than to watch a little house wren just dive bomb and eat all of those Japanese beetles. I think that would just make my day. We have a little pair of kestrels that are at the house, and they like Japanese beetles, and they'll like fly through and eat them and the grasshoppers and stuff. And that's just always so satisfying.
Mm.
Your disdain for Japanese beetles is well established, and I love
Yeah, I
it.
think I've
Yeah,
talked
Noted.
about my disdain for them in the past and how I put them
yeah,
on pikes.
Yeah.
yes. That's Alexis the Impaler, I believe, is her
Right.
nickname.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You could go back to past episodes if you're new here and want to hear about that.
and needed
There's an
chill to run down
episode
your
about
spine.
the impaling of the Japanese beetles, but yeah. So we're thinking about these pollinator habitats, and the cool thing is, I think like the big thing is that if you're like, well, all I have is a butterfly garden. Well, guess what? You also have a beneficial insect garden. You also have a pollinator. You also have a habitat. Like what we did and what we branded sort of these like butterfly gardens 90% of the time was doing work for probably a lot more than butterflies,
Mhm.
right? Like butterflies were coming, but you were doing good work for all of these other beneficial insects that we have, and therefore, everybody higher up the food chain. So if you have a butterfly garden, great. All it can get even bigger and better if you want it to. And if you don't, you're still doing the good work. So I think that's like the cool thing when I
Yeah.
talk to people that they're like, well, I only have this, and I'm like, that's okay. The bees like the same things the flowers do, so or the
That's an
butterflies do.
interesting wrinkle within how we communicate conservation practices to the broader public is that it's
Mm.
always easier if you have it seemingly is always easier if you have a mascot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
it's like I have a monarch way station
Mm-hmm.
and I go out and I just smash every eastern swallowtail that comes in and dares feed on the. It's like no, you don't do that. It's a
Right.
and like the whole thing too with like the saving the bees is like this
Mm-hmm.
very particular focus like on honeybees, and
Mm-hmm.
yet we have
Who
all
aren't
these native
native, by the way.
exactly we have all these native bees that look
Yeah, European
crazy.
honeybees. Yeah,
Like a couple years ago I was out prepping the garden and I was moving some we just kind of fold down and leave the extra stems and stuff
Mm-hmm.
down
great
after.
habitat. Great
And
habitat.
and I started pulling them out, and I felt the ground like buzzing and like all this sound. And it was a nest of bumblebees. And
Mm-hmm.
I never went through entomology. I never realized that
They're so
bumblebees
cool. Yeah.
like nest in the ground, and they have these
Mm-hmm.
little eggs that look like little look like boba tea
They
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
do,
eggs,
yeah.
kind of. And
Tastes different
that was a
though.
cool little yeah. It doesn't slurp up the straw quite as easy, but that was just like a little cool experience for me. But just echoing what you're saying, the branding of these
Mm.
habitats and these practices, which has done a lot of work to get people with normal typical yards or whatever to do that stuff, sometimes sells short just what the actual broader ecological impact of
Mm-hmm.
these things are. So we're talking pest control and pest management, more more balanced pest populations. We're talking about pollination. We're talking about, in the case of like birds, in some cases they're going to eat seeds and they're going to spread those plants to other places. So a lot of different benefits.
Mm-hmm.
If I haven't started yet, do we want to think how might one get started with
Yeah,
this?
I was going to say, getting started, that's the number one question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing I think about, the thing I love about pollinator gardens, and first thing we'll establish about pollinators is that they are absolutely sun loving. Most of the pollinators, I mean, I'm just assuming that you're starting with a full sun area because pollinators are sun loving. But the cool thing about starting a pollinator garden to me is that you can start them from seed, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
plants that, if you want an easy start, you can start with seed. Now, there's certainly a lot of plants that come to mind that you can, get transplants for, if the more woody perennials. But that's a good thing, and you probably don't need a lot of area. I've seen a lot of really cool pollinator gardens that are in containers,
Mm-hmm.
folks that had just small containers of plants on a patio, and that was their little kind of pollinator paradise. So every little bit helps. So you don't have to start big, even though, some of the bigger plantings you may have, greater success with the greater numbers of pollinators. You don't have to have a big area to get started. And once again, it can start with just a pack of seeds and a little bit of space on the ground somewheres. So not too difficult, and don't be daunted by getting started. And if you need help with even finding the seeds or getting the seeds or choosing the seeds,
Mhm.
there's even lots of programs that help you get the proper seeds, and there's even some programs that can offset the cost of purchasing some of these seeds. I noticed on a state level and a national level, and we'll try to include some of those in the show notes for you guys. So getting started is not too terribly difficult. So don't be stopped by that
It's
with the
interesting, Ray, that
pollinator.
you say like you think of seeds as kind of like an easier route, and I'm the opposite. Like
Yeah.
and I love starting seeds. It's like one of my greatest joys in life is seeing a seed sprout. Hashtag how nerdy are you? But I always think that putting in plants that are more established,
Hmm.
going now, there's a greater investment, obviously, like you have to look at it
Yeah,
that way.
that I
So
was looking at the money outlay. Yeah,
yeah,
but that's true. That's true.
but I love going in and you kind of get more of an
Mm,
instant impact. You know
you do.
what
Yeah.
weeds are, what's a weed and what's not, at least in this case scenario. But I think the one thing, go ahead, Brett.
No, no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say the one thing what you're thinking about when you think about deciding on what you're going to grow, and we'll put like some links in the show notes to some stuff, but diversity is the biggest thing. So,
Hmm.
diversity not only in color of your blooms, but also like your quote unquote shape of your plant. So, you
Yeah.
want, if possible, if you're growing in containers, that's totally fine. But, you want things that are mounding,
Mm-hmm.
some things that are tall, some things, and then variety in bloom time, especially if you're
Mm-hmm.
That's a big
focusing on
one.
Yeah.
pollinators, right? The more variety of bloom time you can have, the more you're going to keep those pollinators around. So I think that thinking of it as a variety is really important no matter where you're starting.
Yeah, because what a bee may enjoy is going to be completely different than what a hummingbird would enjoy. Like a bee is looking for the blues and the yellows, the simple flowers with
Mm-hmm.
single layers of petals, whereas hummingbirds would enjoy something like trumpet honeysuckle or columbine or the tube shaped flowers. So
Mm-hmm.
you have to even understand what, if you have a specific need to attract a certain type of pollinator, be sure to do your research on the plants for that, because not all pollinators look for the same type of flower. That's very important. And butterflies have their own thing. They love the reds, orange, and yellow blooms. They love things like zinnias and marigolds and all the flowers like that. But a lot of it goes back to entomology and just understanding kind of what the insects specifically look for. So we talked about the different types of pollinators, the bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, things like that. So just kind of keep that in mind, that each set has their own kind of requirements for what they're looking for in nature. So, and then that speaks to the diversity Alexis just mentioned. And if you have a wide diversity of pollinator plants, you stand a better chance of, attracting a diversity of pollinators to those pollinator plants. So, yeah, it's a good point, Alexis.
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah.
say, Alexis, if you need me to give you any tips on scarification and stratification, seed starting stuff, I know that
Oh,
you're just
oh.
starting out. So
Yeah, we
I'm
should.
happy to do that we'll do that offline. I don't want to embarrass you or
Well,
anything.
I was gonna say we should do a whole episode on like a very specific seed because we've done seed starting. So if you are new to starting seeds, we do have a past episode on that. But all of those extra things of that, like if you don't know what scarification or stratification
Ooh.
is,
Oh,
we could
sorry.
do
That's not
this whole.
scarification.
Mm.
We could do a whole
That's
episode
scaredification.
on those, and Brett has probably more experience in that way,
That's
just
not true.
because.
That's not true. It was meant as a bit. That was meant as a
I know,
bit
but
because
I'm
Alexis
giving
has
you
been.
credit where credit is due
He was
I
because
have done a
gauging
little
you.
bit. I've deferred to Alexis' expertise, but I was just trying to get a rise out of her because she's done all
he's
kinds of crazy propagation and other things.
listen, I love me some propagation. It soothes me in a way that I cannot. No
Yeah.
other anything can soothe me in the way like propagating in my greenhouses. It's just like, it's that good stuff. That's that good stuff.
Wholesome. That's
But
the good, wholesome fun. Well, one thing I was going to say in response to Ray's comments there about some of the color differences and stuff. So butterflies, they actually not so recently, but somewhat recently discovered even more advanced. They have way more advanced color based eyesight than we do.
mhm,
Mm.
So we have a set of three. A typical functioning human eye has a set of three different types of rods that can see reds, blues, and yellows.
Mm.
And the butterflies can see you like their very basic ones have 6 different color photoreceptors, and they've discovered ones that have up to 15 different
Oh
Jeez.
wow.
photoreceptors, meaning that within that spectrum of where we're seeing 3 different colors and recombining them with our brain, they're actually seeing entirely different spectra of colors. So like I just want to see for one day I want to see flowers the way that butterflies see them.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
There was a cool Radio Lab episode maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it was talking about like the mantis shrimp, which is like the top dog as far as seeing different spectra. They can see like infrared light and like all this other crazy stuff. But I would not encourage mantis shrimp in the butterfly garden per se, but it just does add like, we see 3 different flowers and they're all pink, but a butterfly is actually seeing these different spectra. The other thing I was looking at too, just as a supplement for this, was like I'm always fascinated by the flight of butterflies because they'll kind of do this like looping
Mhm.
around
Mm-hmm.
thing. And apparently they can see different flowers up to like 50 meters away that they're kind of wanting to go and like specifically hone in on. But they'll
Hmm.
also like they don't really understand the flight pattern necessarily, but can somehow know that other patches of flowers are like up to 200 meters away as they're kind of traveling through. And it's
Wow.
crazy kinds of information. But just a wrinkle on the not just the colors for what they're feeding on, but a lot of these species also have these symbiotic relationships with the plants as far as
Mm-hmm.
what they lay their
Yeah.
eggs on and all that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Mhm.
There's just so much crazy, cool information floating around in the natural world that we, through our limited sensory organs, don't actually directly access. And I just think, to Ray's point, the different color, like the bees just kind of like this color of flower is like such a cool
So
aspect of
much,
the whole.
so much goes into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I
Yeah. And
would
even
say
butterflies. Yeah. They're different. But
I
yeah.
would
Go
say
ahead,
the
Josh.
other tip that I would give if you were planting, outside of pots, something maybe a little bit larger of an area, I'm not
Yeah.
talking anything crazy, is to group your plants.
That's a big
So
Mhm.
one. Yeah.
if you're buying or sowing a seed of something, to put everything like in one area. So coneflower,
Mm-hmm.
echinacea is a really
Yeah.
big one that people like to plant and are pretty familiar with. And so instead of, say you buy 3 coneflower, instead of putting them in like a triangle around the garden, put all 3 of them together, with proper spacing. But when you think about it, remember, we often think about our gardens like in a visual, what's visually appealing to us. And we think, oh,
Mhm.
we'll spread the love, spread things around. But I want you to think about it as the insect that you're trying to attract,
Yeah.
whatever
Right.
pollinator or beneficial you're trying to attract is. They're very tiny. A lot of our good bugs don't fly. And even if they do fly, they're still very tiny. And so they want a short distance as possible to get from things to thing. So really kind of clustering those plants, and you can create like some really pretty waves. You can still make it very visually appealing by clustering these, but putting them together is a really big one for that. And then I wanted to point out, if you're wanting to do something larger, because we like to on this podcast have something like every episode could be for both the commercial grower, larger scale grower, and the homeowner, right? Because I think we can all work together and we're all doing a lot of the same things. But if you are maybe a little bit larger, or you're a homeowner who has some space that you want to kind of take up and do some good habitat for, going in with something more like hedgerows. And one
Mhm.
thing that I want to do, I've got some hedgerows at my farm, but adding in a few more, like it's okay to put an area of hedge in the middle of your field if you want. Like, yeah, it takes some planning, but if you're putting that hedgerow closer to those crops that you want to have protected, so say you want them to eat the Japanese beetles and you want the wrens to be nesting and around, putting a bird bath out there, or even a water source for the bees. Bees need water. So putting water sources around the crops that you want to protect or pollinate would be super beneficial. And so kind of popping those in close by, whether they're annual or perennial. And then things like, we've talked a lot about cover crops, and cover crops are, I swear, just growing and with possibility. And by the way, Josh, I used the calculator the other day when I was buying.
Nice.
We have a cover crop calculator through CCD, and I used it the other day to buy some sorghum Sudan grass. But you know, choosing cover crops that can support your beneficials as well. So buckwheat is a really great example. Bees love buckwheat. You can buy buckwheat honey. So if you're really into the bees and you want to have a garden, you can, use, and everybody wins, right? You're getting the cover crop benefits, but you're supporting the pollinators. It's an annual crop. You don't have to, it incorporates really easy. Like there's so many good things, but there's a
And I
lot of
guarantee you,
ways.
buckwheat honey will be the most unique honey that you will ever eat. And there's two camps with buckwheat honey: those that
I
love
love
it
it.
and those that do not. And I enjoy it. To me, it's almost got a taste reminiscent of sorghum, just a bit.
Like molasses or sorghum. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
molasses sorghum cross. But yeah, it's an amazing crop, and I love those places in the U.S. that have a lot of buckwheat where you can buy that dark buckwheat honey, and it
Yeah.
makes an
So
amazing
just,
cough
I
syrup.
wanted you, if you're, maybe on a little bit of a larger scale and you're wanting to put in some habitat or
Mhm.
pollinator area, to kind of think of it, you don't necessarily have to think about putting in a bunch of coneflower. If you're not a flower farmer, that's not super beneficial
Yeah.
to you. But if you wanted to put in some windbreaks, right? And so there's
Mm-hmm.
money through the NRCS to put in some native windbreaks that are great habitat that'll bring in those pollinators, and then using those cover crops. So it doesn't always have to be like you're taking up valuable space
Right.
for a cash crop, or that you could be using for a cash crop. There's ways to use it for both.
Yeah,
So,
along those lines, I mean, whether for the bigger scale or the smaller scale, I had been looking into some documentation on site selection, and as they talk about windbreaks and places that are somewhat sheltered from really
mm-hmm.
harsh weather are recommended. But something else that was noted was they said the ideal site in this Tennessee publication was one that's undisturbed generally by the traffic of people and
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
pets, but also, I thought this was brilliant, open to your view. So you could
Mm.
thinking of your garden or your space as somewhere that has vantage points, and your observation is going to be really key in the
Mm-hmm.
management and learning about what is being attracted to this
I
space,
love
what's
that.
coming
Yeah.
in, how it's behaving. I thought that was really smart and usually
Yeah.
overlooked.
Oh,
Yeah.
not only for me to be the touchy feely guy on the podcast again. One of my favorite things to do in the summertime is to watch bees and
Hmm.
birds and
Mm-hmm.
butterflies work. Like
Hmm.
bird watching thing, I kind of
It's
like it,
mesmerizing.
but
Hmm.
watching them work. So we have like this group of goldfinches that comes through every fall when the some of the coneflower and stuff is has set seed, and they just go crazy and just like strip it all, and they just are so happy. And like it's like a turning point in my year now that we've had that in for almost 10 years, I guess now, and they know it's there. It's really
Mm-hmm.
cool to see that cyclical thing. But watching bees work, you mentioned the buckwheat.
Oh
Oh
yeah.
man, a field of buckwheat and
It
like when during
hums,
that
like you
that
will hear
peak,
it.
yeah. Oh my, it's like I would just get a little umbrella, sit out there. And I don't have a field of buckwheat, nearby now, but when I used to work at the farm, we'd have some out, and I would just go and like sit out there and eat lunch and watch them. It was so cool. I just loved it.
I did a lot of buckwheat last year, and I had a buckwheat row right next to the row I was picking in, and I was picking, and I didn't have my headphones in, and I was like, what is that noise? Like I just could not figure it out. And I was like, no one else is here. I kind of got a little freaked out at first because I was like, what is this humming noise I'm hearing? Is like a fan blown out on my tunnel? Like what's going on? And I finally realized it's the bees working the buckwheat that I was right,
Mm.
my
Oh,
head was
Hmm.
down in there, and I was like, oh, well, this is good.
amazing. Yeah. And another just side note too on like I was mentioning, we have some different things out in our yard that we've put in for this purpose. And a lot of the native stuff, the perennial native stuff, once it gets established, it is like seemingly bulletproof as
Mm-hmm.
far as like there'll
Yeah.
be times where we go through a period of drought and everything, even like some of the stuff that you'd expect to be pretty robust, is looking rough without additional water. And they just, to borrow from the bee thing, they're just humming right along. You wouldn't even know that we haven't gotten
Yeah.
rain for a long period of time. The
Mm-hmm.
roots go down super deep. It's retaining soil. It's retaining water. There's a whole lot of other benefits there. I thought you started kind of a little bit of the conversation of some of the species, Alexis. Do we want to kind of
Mm.
popcorn out some species that we see or people tend to like and give some hot takes?
Yeah, I mean,
I'll
I think.
start. I'll
Go ahead.
start.
Fine.
Echinacea, overrated.
Wow.
I there's a time and place for it, but things do like it. I
No, no,
actually
no.
grow a lot of echinacea, so
Yeah, no. I mean, we have echinacea too.
hmm
I just feel like echinacea. That's coneflower. If
hmm
you sometimes the purple coneflower is probably the most visually
that's the
iconic as
native
far as
species. Yeah.
what people think of. I just feel like it, much like Monarch Waystation,
hmm
got like this weird preferred position
hmm
in like the minds of people. And don't get me wrong, I'd much rather see them put in some echinacea than not. But I just think it's a big flower that appeals to our visual senses and to butterflies, and so I mean, and to pollinators, and so and birds, as I mentioned. But I think there's a lot of other opportunities, a lot of other things to look around at if you're just getting into the wildflower native pollinator species. That's
So
all.
I think that I could change you, Brett, only because I grow several different species of coneflower that are a lot a lot more fun, I think, and not like color wise necessarily. I mean, they're still kind of that pinky purple color, but their movement, they're not that sturdy, rigid like the Tennessee coneflower is Echinacea tenensiensis is
Say that tenensiensis times
it
fast.
has like 18 N's and S's in it. But anyways, so it's this
Don't
really
think about it.
tall, very like they're the ones when the wind blows, they're just like kind of moving like this. Real, you can't see me if you're listening to this, but they
They're
move and
swaying.
just
They're
they
swaying in the
dance
wind like
and they have that
miscanthus,
pretty
or
yes, yeah.
yeah.
So I think I'll have to have you out this June when everything
I'm
starts
not
blooming.
actually. I was just trying to start some controversy. I'm not actually anti
Just for
echinacea.
He
one.
is totally stirring the pot.
So I think that I need to start this conversation with you should plant your native. So what might be native for Kentucky might not. If you're not in Kentucky, you need to look up your native plants if you're trying to attract native pollinators and habitat for birds and things like that. You're going to look for natives. So here, we tell people there's 3 4 different species of goldenrod that are all native to Kentucky. It is also our state flower, but there's a lot more. Like I have it's called wand goldenrod, and it doesn't bloom until after first frost. And so what it does is help those pollinators who are trying desperately to finish, maybe collecting
Hmm.
pollen or whatever that is, and their seed much later into the year. So I leave that up, and it is like a fluorescent neon yellow, and it gets like 5 foot tall, and it's not aggressive. A lot of people think of goldenrod, they think of an aggressive plant. So it's one of my favorites, especially if you want some color like in your gardens late in the year. In November, it's blooming. So that's a really cool one that you can do, and it is a native here. So really thinking about those species, but like goldenrod's one of my favorites. Baptisia is another one. If it's
False
also called,
indigo.
yeah, false indigo. It comes in lots of different colors. One thing about colors that I haven't mentioned yet, I'm going to mention here. So,
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
so if your goal is pollinators, like specifically pollinators who are going to feed on like a nectar source or a pollen source, because there's plants that are just like Brett said earlier, host plants, right? They just need the eggs, or if you're just trying to bring in things that might eat the leaves, whatever. If we're talking about things that want the pollen or the nectar, it is better to use a straight species. And coneflower is a really great example of this because
Hmm.
What does it mean? What does straight species
yep.
mean? Sorry.
Yep, that's what I'm going to talk about. So the purple coneflower, as an example, is let's see, echinacea. Is it purpurea? I have to
I
look
believe
that
so.
up. But
Yeah.
so
Purpurea.
that is the. But then if you go to a garden center and there's orange echinacea and white echinacea and there's all these other really cool
Mexican coneflower.
there's all kinds of really cool fluffy ones. Are they great for your soil? Will they help the micro? Will they do a lot of those things that the natives do? Yes, but a lot of that selective breeding has bred out those nectar and or pollen sources.
Mhm.
So if that is your goal, go with the straight species of something and not the and an easy way is that if it's named something fancy. So if it's
Mhm.
like called what's like
Purple
a like
giant or something.
giant or
Yeah.
gold baby goldenrod is a good example. Gold
Gold
is
baby.
that's and it's in quotes. It'll be in quotes. And so what that means is that one has been named and is bred. So that's one way to kind of look at it. It might have a little copyright thing on it where you can't propagate it. You can certainly mix those in, but your straight species are going to be the truest native. They're going to be the
Hmm.
best for pollinator habitat.
Yeah. And they tend to
So,
be the ones that are marketed as like wildflower seed or
mhm.
native plant seed or native plant
Yeah,
stuff.
you'll see a lot of those featured on the Kentucky, and we covered this in a previous episode. But the Kentucky Native Plant Society is a wealth of information on a lot of that, on what Alexis is talking about, and they even have a section on pollinators because it's always great when you can cross-reference pollinators with the natives, and the natives have all those benefits that Brett and Alexis were talking about with being locally adapted and tend to deal with our local weather patterns a little bit better. But yeah, check out that if you've not already done so. The references for that will be an episode or two back, I think, in the podcast.
You want to know what
Ray.
my favorite
Oh.
native plant is? That is love wasps, like the beneficial wasps, not necessarily the ones that are going to sting you, but the ones that'll go after
Like
like the bad
brackenoid,
caterpillars and stuff like
yeah, the
that.
little brackenoid
Yeah, yeah,
wasp,
my
yeah.
favorite ones, and they're so pretty. Those wasps, man, they're
Yeah.
gorgeous. They're so shiny. Anybody want to guess what my favorite one is? I've probably talked about it before.
Deal. Deal attracts
No,
those, I think,
but
as well.
umbel flowers are great for habitat, pollinator habitat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Any
What
guesses?
is, no?
Anybody?
What you got?
No. Rattlesnake master.
Oh.
Oh,
Yeah, Google that right now. Everybody listening,
do
rattlesnake
it.
master.
Do it.
Even
It
if you're
is a native
driving.
Kentucky plant. It looks like it belongs in the Arizona desert. I love it. And if you grow cuts or you do anything cool like that, because obviously growing cut flowers is cool, rattlesnake
Obs.
master. And it does not look like it belongs here, but it's wonderful. Surprisingly adaptable to our clay soils. It does like a dry area. So if you've got one, it's great. But
Mm-hmm.
it gets this
I have to look
white
it up.
ball, it looks like a agave plant, and it gets this
Mm-hmm.
stem and gets these white, very round balls on the top of it. That's the bloom, and so it's one of my favorites, and it's real edgy, real
Well,
cool.
Ray, you said one, you like just like Alexis said, goldenrod. You know, people think is plantus non grata. Do you mentioned one earlier that I thought was bad? You said something about some kind of honeysuckle, right?
Yeah, that's if you're trying to attract specific ones. But the trumpet honeysuckle, there's lots of different types of honeysuckle. Be very careful, even though they may attract pollinators, they're not necessarily desirable, like the bush honeysuckle, the amur type. We don't necessarily want that. But there's vining honeysuckle, and then there's the bush honeysuckle that's much more aggressive. But now, because they do have a trumpet shaped flower, they do attract pollinators. So there's good and bad within that grouping of plants. So be careful with that because some of these that may be good at attracting pollinators, they still may not be necessarily desirable if you're looking to stay with the native, more non-invasive plants.
I
Another
think
point.
the trumpet honeysuckle is Lonicera sempervirens, I believe.
Yeah,
So
you're talking about the one that is desirable.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
you've got the good cousin and the bad cousin.
yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing that I had to learn once I got into the. I was like, wait a second,
People just say
honeysuckle.
Mhm.
honeysuckle.
Yeah, I'm
Usually,
scared. I'm afraid.
yeah, unfortunately, it's in a bad light a lot of times because the bush honeysuckle, the invasive type, that I hear honeysuckle unfortunately being all grouped into the bad guys list, and that's
Mhm.
not necessarily the
We
case
have
because
native
there's
Kentucky honeysuckles.
yeah, we do. Yeah, and those are totally desirable. And I believe that, even people that plant super common things that are awesome for butterflies, and this happened to us last year. Jennifer did not plant my wife did not plant a butterfly garden, but that's what it ended up being because it was zinnias and marigolds,
Yep.
which obviously it was going to attract butterflies. And I had never seen butterflies in our community, but I saw tons of butterflies down next to the kind of a creek that we plant a garden by, and it was awesome, and she would just love to go down there and look at those. But I think it's an important point here that if you are a home gardener, and even though you're not planting a pollinator garden specifically, but you enjoy plants like zinnias and marigolds, be very careful with your use of pesticides because you
Mhm.
are going, and insecticides specifically, because you're going to attract these things just naturally. They're going to be attracted, especially if you planted, as Alexa said, group or mound plantings, big plantings in monoculture of these types of plants.
It's
So
like
just kind of be careful about that.
poisoning the buffet.
Right,
Yes,
right.
that's the salmonella on the buffet that you don't want. Yeah, exactly. But I believe sometimes people naturally just they don't conceptualize their plantings as pollinator gardens, but that's essentially what they're doing because they are planting plants that attract
Mhm.
these things. And when I see that, and I'm out in my local communities, I kind of, especially if those plants particularly are oftentimes planted next to home gardens because they're easy to grow and they're just kind of a standard garden plant, a companion plant. A lot of times I see those. But, when we're growing food crops, we may necessarily have to involve the use of pesticides to control certain insects that would destroy those food crops. And that's when I enter into that discussion. I'm like, oh, yeah, specifically because you planted these rows of flowers next to your tomatoes, be super extra careful on your timing and bloom period, and if you can spray when there's not wind around. So I really encourage people to be careful because I see a lot of times those specific flowers around gardens for whatever reason. They're kind of old standards, and I love them myself. They're really easy to grow.
Yeah,
So
something your Zinnia and Marigold comment made me think of is some of the things I think we've said throughout the whole series of podcasts is that there is a whole line of people who are like native plant purists, and it's like
Yes.
if it's not
sure.
native, you shouldn't. I don't necessarily feel that way. I think that there's good opportunities for all kinds of different plants. I obviously would steer people away from invasive and damaging things, but like if a flower produces nectar, it kind of by definition is a beneficial pollinator
Right.
To some
plant.
guy, yeah. To somebody,
Yeah,
some insect, yeah.
and like Alexis was talking about having the straight species plant, of the echinacea or whatever, and then we have both. We have a big patch of regular purple coneflower, and then we also have little selections of some of the other ones, just because we like the look of them and they're cool.
Mhm.
And guess what? People,
Absolutely.
plants, do, or I mean, bugs do get on them. It's not like when they go crazy in some of the other sections, but it's pretty cool. But it's just one of those echoing like we aren't trying to create or foster any shame based anything about you
No.
have
No,
to,
not at all.
if you don't have any connection to the native stuff and you want to try something else, that's cool too. Josh, you got any species that you're particularly jazzed about?
I really kind of became enchanted with like purple Joe Pye weed when I was looking up
Yes,
in the
Oh, I
mountains and
love
stuff.
it.
Yeah,
Oh
it,
that's
yes,
good for flies and beetles. Everything loves that stuff. I mean,
mhm.
it's good stuff. Yeah,
Little
Yeah,
when
and
he
I
gets
Joe,
really
pretty
if
tall.
you're
yeah.
Yeah,
wanting
the
to,
yeah.
compact. Yeah,
yeah, there's a
Little
compact
Joe.
version, Lil Joe. But that stuff's good. That it's so pretty. It's the
it is a neat
prettiest
one.
mauve pink.
Mhm.
It's sort of like a relative, even the short ones, relatively long stem with a big kind of like brain shaped rounded dome of small flowers, right? That's how you would describe
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's cool, it works really well. Like if you're talking, Alexis was talking about like layering heights or working with different heights. The tall ones get pretty tall, they can get like
Yeah.
10 or 12
Yeah,
feet tall.
very
Yeah.
tall.
You can put that again on a fence row as kind of a backdrop, a fence line or something like that as a backdrop, or as a seasonal privacy fence if it's dense enough even. But that's a good shout, Josh. Man, I knew you'd come up with something.
Hmm.
I was saving that just for that moment.
It feels exotic yet folksy at the same time.
Yeah,
I know.
exactly.
Isn't that
It's
Josh
its
in a
own, it's its
nutshell?
own vibe. It is. That's him. I was trying to think of some common, not failure points, but common challenges that I see before we run out of time here with people that are, wanting to establish a good sized little planting at home from seeds, Alexis, or transplants, I guess.
Gosh.
I know, but I guess we are talking about, especially if you're talking about seeding or putting in transplants or of some kind or another, is that it does take some prep work, just good kind of horticulture principles. A lot of times I see people that do very well with these plantings. They're modest plantings, maybe they may be 16 square foot or whatever, but they will address like weed pressure to
Hmm.
enable establishment easier. And they'll do that in a lot of cases. I recommend a lot is like solarization with a heavy piece of like black plastic, kind of put
Hmm.
that on early in the season. And you'll naturally, through heat processes, you know, do some weed bed sterilization. And that's great prep work. But I guess my point being that it does take some prep work. It takes soil disturbance to get those seeds in the ground and eliminate competition to the point to where they can get established. And that the same goes for transplants. Alexis mentioned mulch. That's really important as you're putting in these woody perennials. Mulch does a couple things. It suppresses competition while that's getting established and preserves moisture. But I think people that do really good with these plantings, they do their homework and they prepare a seed bed to get these pollinator gardens up and going. And I think that's the ones that have the best best outcomes are the ones that put that prep work in,
Prep work,
getting them warm.
and I tell people 2 years worth of weeding, like 2 years
Yes.
worth of
Yeah.
active weeding.
Yeah.
After that, it's usually once or twice a year. But if you do it the work up
Hmm.
front and keep on top of it for those kind of first 2 years, and sometimes you might be weeding out some of those plants that get a little crazy.
It's
You know,
really hard
sometimes
to, yeah, to
yeah, you'll
balance
be
that.
weeding out some rudbeckia or something like that. But keeping that, and then I think it's okay to remember that it's in some cases, depending on where it's located at, it might look a little messy. All right, some of
Mm.
these plants
Definitely.
can
And,
look
Wild.
it,
Wild, maybe.
it
wild. They're
should.
wild, right?
And that's a
Right.
common failure
It's
point that I
habitat.
see. People will go clean that up at the end of the season. I'm like, well, we have to really think about what we're doing. Now, I realize that a garden may get unruly, but except for English gardeners, they love unruly for some reason. English type gardeners.
Cottage gardeners.
Yeah, cottage gardeners. But and you guys have alluded to this several times
Bit
during the
cheeky.
podcast today, is you need to leave that those, you don't necessarily need to deadhead, because that's also habitat. It's seed for birds
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the season. And if you need to do some of that tidying up, wait till late in the season. We're talking
Like
about late
right now,
winter. Yeah, late winter, early
March.
spring.
Yeah.
Do it then. Leave the habitat in place. And Brett, you mentioned that you had, what did you say you had laid over and provided habitat
Yeah, all
earlier on? That
kinds
was a
of
great example. A great
all
example.
kinds of stuff. But like a compass plant has a big, beefy, chunky
Mm-hmm.
stem.
Hmm.
Annie this time of year when she's getting cabin fever, she goes out and does what she calls stomping the yard, which is just basically walking around, stomping and breaking up the stems and kind of creating a mulch area. You know, we actually don't
Nice.
remove them at all anymore, but it is nice this time of year to
Yeah.
Yeah.
get people out. I think
Listen.
another thing I would add to the prep thing or the planning thing is like pay attention to how big these plants are going to get.
Yeah.
Mm.
I think people sometimes put them way too close together.
Mm-hmm. They spread.
Hypothetically, me, I might have done that before. And then it's like you have if you want a wild look, a really wild look, have them up against each other and competing and trying to spread and everything else. It's a whole vibe. But yeah, that would be another thing I would add to the prep and planning is that some of these things can get pretty big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want them to spread and fill in, that way the
Yeah,
weeds aren't
definitely,
there. Like
definitely.
that's the ultimate goal. But
A couple other popcorn species I would throw out to just take a look at. If people are looking to get into the seed catalogs or whatever. One I love is things in the genus Liatris,
mm-hmm.
Liatris, blazing star. Sometimes it's called. They have
Mm-hmm.
this really cool long spike of flowers. A lot of bees really like
Is
those.
that also the firecracker plant in there? I can't remember what they call a
I'm not
firecracker.
sure.
No,
I forget.
gay feather
Gay
is
feather is what I. Yeah.
Leatris.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
In the genus Asclepius, the
Mm.
milkweeds. So there's like the traditional kind of swamp milkweeds, the big pink flowers, but there's
Hmm.
also the with what is called butterfly weed, which is confusing, but it's like a butterfly milkweed. It's a little orange flowered
Hmm.
Asclepius
That
tuberosa.
one's a lot less aggressive, so that's the one I
It's
usually
Totally.
very pretty. It's a
recommend.
pretty plant too. It's very attractive. I think
But
it's
those
fun.
the milkweed claim to fame is that it has a chemical in it that the monarch butterfly caterpillar, when it emerges, eats, and then it's like a natural kind of defense mechanism. And so there's this relationship between milkweed and monarchs that you have to
Mhm.
have you have to have those if you want to qualify as a monarch way station or whatever. And then the other thing I'm going to give a shout out to, predictable as a tree guy, do not underestimate how important tree flowers are
Yes.
Hmm.
to all kind. I mean, trees in general, I think we show them a lot of love, but there are tons of butterflies and birds and other insects that have like an obligate relationship
Mhm.
with these tree flowers. And especially in this early season, we're starting to see things open up here.
Maples.
Yeah, totally. All those planting trees, like deciduous trees that flower, is another component of providing that habitat and providing that food. That was something I didn't understand until I really started learning more about trees,
Mhm.
and so that's a pretty cool aspect of it too, along with some of the woody perennials as opposed to the things that die back to the ground and all that. But it's yeah. So those are a couple of the fun ones that I see a lot of people. Star anise. I mean, sorry, anise hyssop
Yeah,
is
hyssop. Mhm.
hyssops are really cool. That we planted some of those last year for the first time. But I always like having a little smattering of things to look through and nerd out about if you're thinking about planting stuff.
It's a lot of pretty stuff out there, so you can really incorporate.
Lavender, yeah,
I've
that's a
I've
good
got a
one.
friend
Lavender.
who the house she bought is got a very formal. It's boxwood, Nandina, hollies, like very formal garden, and she was like, "I'm gonna rip all of this out." I was like, "You don't necessarily need to rip it out. Like if it needs to go, it needs to go." But what we started doing was, leaving the stuff that was still healthy and incorporating like hyssop. She's got hyssop and
Oh man.
veronica like snuck in,
Mhm.
in there. So she's got these blooms and she's mixed them into this very formal English garden style planting. And I've convinced her not to take out her hollies because I use them in the winter. But so
Got
it's,
them.
yeah, very selfish of me. But yeah, so it's like you don't need to necessarily rip everything out if that's what you're working with. Just incorporate some things into your general landscape if you don't have space
Mhm.
for a separate like garden area. That's totally cool.
Throw in some lantana for the butterflies. I mean, it adds color and diversity and goes a long way to breaking up a row of boxwoods or taxus or junipers.
Yeah. Awesome.
Lantana.
Lantana is one of
Lantana.
those. I always see butterfly every time a lantana
Oh
starts to
yeah,
bloom.
that's
I
a
see
good one.
butterflies.
Hummingbirds like it.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
actually changes color. So those individual florets, how they, our
Mm-hmm.
middle might be yellow and goes red. So once the bee has pollinated that individual floret,
It's an
it
indicator.
it
Yeah,
will turn color so that the bees no longer see it with their like light spectrum, and they will know to go to a different and not waste their time. And I
I'm a
was like,
big fan of
that
lantana. I've grown to love it. It
fascinating.
does. Yeah, it's a neat plant. It
And
really
is
Yeah.
is.
that
It's
is that
cool.
how we get broccoli florets?
No,
Oh, that's
You would
different.
hope so.
Sorry,
Not
I'm
not
off.
as colorful. Not as
broccoli
colorful.
is a flower.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Period.
Sorry.
Period. All right. Well, any other lasting impressions or tips or tricks or where, and no means we've all got kind of different realms of how we've done. There's no wrong way to do a pollinator garden or a habitat area. So, experiment, do what feels right for you. If you have more questions, you can contact us, but any lasting thoughts,
If
friends?
you have friends who have pollinator gardens, in many cases, if they've had them for a couple of years, like we have, stuff will have set seed and spread,
Bees.
and there will be a lot of baby coneflowers and
Nice. Yeah.
milkweed and all kinds of stuff that is actually, Alexis mentioned, weeding some of that stuff out. Well, weeding is also can also be called transplanting if you do it in the right order of operations and put it in the ground
So
instead
Brett
of
is
the yard
inviting you to
basement.
his home. You can come anytime during the day or
Come
night.
and reap what our garden hath sown.
Open invite.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I believe that'll do it for the day. Thank you for being here with us. If you like this episode or any of our other episodes, please feel free to leave us a review. It feeds the algorithm that is the evil algorithm to help more people find us and hopefully learn something and have a laugh with us once in a while. So we're glad you were here today and we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and feel free to contact us anytime. Have a good one.